Welcome to TVP World here at the Brussels studio. My name is Laura Chazanow and I'm joined by Daniel Freund, member of the European Parliament for the Greens Party. So glad to have you with us. Let's kick it off with the big news coming out of Wednesday evening. Hungary has lifted its veto for Ukraine to start its first cluster for the accession process into the European Union. And my question here is this now smooth sailing, or do you expect we still may see trouble from some states that may come out of the woodwork who don't really want to see Ukraine become part of the EU?
I mean, this is the very beginning. It's the opening of the first chapter. I think this is a very good message to send to Ukraine. We see the horrible waves of attack that seem to be intensifying, more and more drones and missiles going into Kiev every night. So I think this is a good signal now to send to Kiev that we're finally now starting the actual talks on accession. But this is not the end of the discussion. It's the opening of the first of 35 chapters. There's lots of work to be done for the Ukrainians. Now it's about decades of EU law to be implemented into the Ukrainian system. So there will be many more decisions. We will have to open by unanimity every single of those chapters. We will have to close every single one of those chapters. And then we have to decide on the overall, is Ukraine now ready to join? I don't foresee this to be a question of weeks or months. We're talking years from here. But yeah, the risk is obviously there, and we have seen that in the past, that member states unfortunately misuse these constant unanimous decisions to extract something for themselves. So I hope we don't, but my fear is there is a risk that might happen.
And on the timeline, there's a question here. Obviously, we've been hearing so much about accelerating the process. I've heard Commissioner Koss insist that this is the time to speed up Ukraine's accession. Yet, obviously, Magyar has explicitly stated that he opposes this. He says that this is going to be a timeline of 10, 15 years. Would you say that the concept of fast-tracking, of speeding up that process of accession for Ukraine is a completely dead concept? Should we even entertain it? Because it seems to take up so much space in the discussion sphere here in Brussels.
I'm not sure how helpful it is now to constantly speculate on when exactly will be the end of a process that has really barely started. I think now it's about being as fast as possible on the actual chapters, on delivering the reforms that are necessary, and then we see how fast this goes. The big elephant in the room at the end of the day, the one condition that really needs to be fulfilled before Ukraine can join the Union is the question of the war in Ukraine. And unfortunately that, to some degree, or maybe to an entire degree, is out of the hands of the Ukrainian leadership, the Ukrainian government, because that's about what Vladimir Putin does. If he keeps attacking Ukraine, so far the message from the Europeans is quite clear that a country at war can unfortunately not become a member of the European Union. So this is the elephant in the room.
And on that question, on exactly ending the war, we've heard Peter Magyar coming out yesterday and saying that Hungary could potentially mediate talks between Ukraine and Russia. Is this a realistic prospect?
I don't know. I mean, I have heard as well that Germany, France, UK are working on reopening, so to speak, diplomatic channels again. I mean, it's supremely difficult. There have been talks in all kinds of different formats. At the end of the day, it was always Putin that made these talks fail, that refused even to have any kind of meaningful discussion, that has refused to talk to Zelensky. First and foremost, he has talked to Trump or some others, but not to Zelensky. I don't know. But we all want peace, and anyone that wants to help or can help with that, I think it's welcome. But at the end of the day, this is in the hands of Vladimir Putin to stop his war of aggression on Ukraine.
And obviously there's been a lot of talk, as you mentioned, within the European Union to maybe elect a special envoy for those talks with Russia. Just last week, I was in Cyprus, where I heard Kaja Kallas say that we should be setting down our own maximalist demands against Russia. She said that we should be demanding a reduction of troop numbers, that we should demand from Russia that it retreats from Georgia and Moldova, both countries also interested in joining the bloc. Would you say that you agree with this, or is this a pointless exercise, trying to set down these maximalist demands? And if not, do you have any in mind?
I mean, I definitely think, you should go into any kind of negotiation well prepared. And you should think about the different scenarios, how open and for everyone to see. That's always the question in these kind of negotiations. I think in the first stage, Putin has destroyed any kind of trust, any kind of confidence in him over the last few years. So. I'm not sure how helpful it is if we publicly now make all kind of maximalist demands, but we should go into these negotiations definitely well prepared.
And now the big news coming out of last week, obviously the European Commission agreeing to unlock those 16.4 billion euros for Budapest, but it's clear that the real work will start now for Magyar's government. What do you feel is the biggest challenge in transforming the country?
I mean, there's actually a whole number of challenges, right? 16 years of Orban's mafia system is not something that you make disappear overnight. The new government has now a lot of power. They have a 2/3 majority in parliament. They can change the constitution with their own majority. So I'm hopeful that they can deliver these reforms that they have promised, but it is a formidable challenge. They need functioning institutions to fight corruption. We have seen the enormous corruption of Orban, his family and closest friends that have become millionaires, some of them billionaires, by stealing public funds. That needs to stop. We need to get this money back, and these people need to be held accountable. But also this is a lot of work. But also for this to be possible, we need independent courts. We need independent prosecutors that actually bring these cases before courts. So lots of different challenges along the way. There is a lot of time pressure because the Corona Recovery Fund expires at the end of August. So just a few months time. All the other countries in the Union have basically run projects for 4 years of time, have planned, have implemented, executed those projects. And now Hungary is trying to do all that in a period of 3 months. That will be a formidable challenge. The big question for me is still, they came out last week in a joint press conference, and I think Magyar in particular framed it as everything is done now, the money is freed. I would caution that a little bit, because basically for now they have agreed on a plan how to free the money, what kind of reforms need to be delivered. And for me as a member of parliament, I haven't seen that plan yet. And it seems no one except for the Commission and the Hungarian government has seen the actual agreement. I'm a bit puzzled, I have to admit. I don't know, do they want to change the milestones, the reforms that had previously been agreed? How is this exactly going to work? We still have some questions in the parliament, I have to say. But yeah, the promises of this new Hungarian government, they seem hopeful, right? Joining the European Public Prosecutor is a good idea. Reforming the institutions that are in charge of fighting corruption, for example, this is good. Where I have more questions is, for example, on the independence of the judiciary and the prosecutors. There as well, Magyar has, for example, demanded the resignation of the president of the highest court, of the chief prosecutor. They haven't stepped down yet, so we might be heading into a constitutional battle to get rid of the Orban loyalists from the highest positions in the country. But there is, in a way, even if the milestones that had previously been agreed with the Commission, there is nothing anymore on judicial independence. There's an ongoing court case. The European Parliament sued against that decision at the end of 23 to unfreeze 10 billion for those judicial reforms. my expectation is that the European Court of Justice will, in the next few months, rule in favor of the European Parliament and say that the reforms under Orban at the time were not sufficient. But that means that the new government also has to deliver on those reforms in order not to now immediately pay back 10 billion euros to the European Commission. So it's the start of a process, but there is a long list of things to be done.
And now, just to wrap things up slowly, moving on from Hungary, the Slovak government has obviously abolished anti-corruption authorities. They have released countless individuals who have been convicted on corruption charges. Mm-hmm. And the European government has now, the European Parliament has now repeatedly called upon the Commission to block those funds from Slovakia. Is this going to become the next battleground? Is this the next looming crisis?
I mean, we have seen in the last few years that these attacks on the rule of law, the dismantling of anti-corruption institutions is not just something that has happened in Hungary. It has happened in Poland as well, but we see in a number of member states where there are issues. Just last week, for example, the European Public Prosecutor also demanded to start the conditionality procedure in the case of Greece, because there as well there are issues with the independence of the prosecutors. They have just passed legislation that would shield members of parliament from any investigation by the European Public Prosecutor. So all these reforms, if you call them that, but attacks really on the rule of law in member states is something where the European Union should be more proactive in going against. In the case of Hungary, we waited basically for well over a decade when democracy, when the rule of law was almost entirely dead, and this mistake we should not repeat. With Poland already we were a little bit faster. I still think too slow, but a little bit faster. And now the question is, are we going to learn from those experiences and be faster in the case of Slovakia, for example? So before years of damage accumulate, is the Union going to say, well, if you increase the risk for EU funds in your country, if you make it more difficult to convict people for corruption, well then you're not going to get that money. And there the European Parliament at least now has been very clear that we want these same procedures to start. It doesn't mean that immediately all funds are gone, but it's the first warning signal. Look, things are really moving in the wrong direction and we want this to stop.
Mr. Freund, thank you so much for joining us and thank you for tuning in. My name is Laura Chazanow and stay with TVP World for more news and updates.